This lecture is on the circulatory system, and we're going to start by talking about blood. The main function of the circulatory system is to transport substances around the bodies. It will transport nutrients to cells, and those nutrients include oxygen, glucose, vitamins, and minerals. It will remove waste from cells, and that waste includes carbon dioxide, water, and other cellular wastes. And it also moves immune cells around the body. Those immune cells include macrophages, B cells, T cells, and antibodies. The circulatory system is made up of three main parts: blood, heart, and blood vessels. The blood is not a liquid, it's actually considered a tissue. In fact, it's a specialized connective tissue that is part liquid and part cellular material. It's got several functions. It will deliver oxygen, water, and nutrients to cell, helps to remove waste products from cells, transports hormones around the body, and fights infections and heals wounds. Blood is made up of about 45% of erythrocytes, less than 1% of leukocytes, less than 1% is platelets, and about 55% of total blood volume is plasma. Erythrocytes are red blood cells. These are cells that have no nucleus or mitochondria, and they're shaped kind of like almost like a frisbee. The term is a biconcave disc, and this helps increase the surface area. That's important for red blood cells because their function is to transport materials. So the more surface area they have, the easier it is for them to transport those materials. Red blood cells carry oxygen from the lungs to all the tissues in the body. Oxygen binds to a protein called hemoglobin within the red blood cell. And a typical red blood cell will last around 100 to 120 days. Plasma is a straw-colored solution that makes up the majority of blood. 90% of plasma is actually water, and 10% is dissolved salts, plasma proteins, and other transported substances such as nutrients, hormones, and wastes. Leukocytes, which make up less than 1% of total blood volume, are white blood cells, and leukocytes fight pathogens and prevent infection. They do this by moving to the parts of the body through the blood, but what they can do is actually exit the blood vessels and enter interstitial fluid to attach to invading pathogens. The remaining component of blood is platelets. These are made up of small fragments of blood cells. Platelets are important to help with clotting of blood after a cut or damage to blood vessels. When the blood vessel is damaged, the platelets actually stick to the site and accumulate, eventually forming a patch. And this process is called clotting. So let's take another look at that. If you have an injury or damage to a blood vessel, the blood vessel around the wound will constrict, and that's called vasoconstriction, which reduces blood flow to that damaged area. Platelets within the blood will stick to exposed collagen fibers from the torn blood vessel wall and spread along the site. The platelets will then release chemicals called clotting factors that will call other platelets to the site to stick together, and that forms what's called a platelet plug. That's when the bleeding will stop. Clotting factors also trigger the formation of a thin thread-like protein called fibrin, and fibrin actually acts like a mesh net, and it traps all those red blood cells and more platelets in that area to form a stronger patch. Then the vessel heals, and the patch actually dries into what we would know as a scab. If we were just to look at a smear of human blood, you can see, and we'll actually zoom in a little closer, you've got red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and then the majority of it is the liquid part that is plasma. There are different types of blood. The cell membrane of red blood cells actually contains special little proteins. They're called glycoproteins, and these are determined by your genetics. So if we were to blow up a red blood cell, you see there's a little protein, that red thing, sticking on the surface of the cell. That is a glycoprotein. These glycoproteins that are attached to red blood cells are called red blood cell antigens. The antigens help your immune system recognize that particular cell as belonging to you. There are two types of red blood cell antigens, A and B. The ABO blood group system classifies blood according to the presence or absence of the A or B antigen on the surface of the red blood cells. So again, you have red blood cells, and you could have either an A antigen or a B antigen on the surface of your red blood cell. The immune system will tolerate your own red blood cell antigens, but if you receive blood that's incompatible with yours, your blood will clump together, or agglutinate is the scientific word for that. So the ABO blood group system, you can have type A blood, you can have type B blood, you can have type AB blood, or type O blood. Type A blood has a surface antigen A, so it's got that glycoprotein A on the surface of its cell. It'll also have what is called anti-B antibodies, and all that means is that someone that has type A blood will have antibodies that will recognize the surface antigen B as being foreign and destroy it. Type B group then has surface antigen B and will also have anti-A antibodies. If you have type AB blood, you have both antigens A and B and no antibodies present. And the last one is type O, where they have no antigens, but they do have both anti-A and anti-B antibodies. So just to sort of summarize this, there are 2 antigens and 2 antibodies that are mostly responsible for the ABO types. And the specific combination of these 4 components will determine an individual's type in most cases. For example, someone that has type A blood will have the A antigen on the surface of their red cells. As a result, that person will not make anti-A antibodies because that would cause a destruction of their own blood. However, if they were exposed to type B blood, their body would make anti-B antibodies and recognize it as alien and cause those cells to be broken down. We consider type AB blood group as a universal recipient. That is because they have all the antibodies. They can receive all types of blood, but they can only be given They can receive all types of blood, but they can only give their blood to someone that has AB. Type O group is considered universal donor, and again, that's because they have no antibodies. They can give to all, but they can only receive type O blood. There's also one more set of blood antigens that you might be familiar with. These are rhesus or Rh antigens, and they're named after the type of monkey they are first identified in. That's a rhesus monkey. Rh plus means that their red blood cells also have another antigen that is called the Rh antigen. They also do not produce any anti-Rh antibodies. Someone that is Rh plus can receive either Rh plus or Rh negative blood. Someone that is Rh negative, that means they do not have that Rh antigen on the surface of their red blood cells. Because of that, they actually do produce anti-Rh antibodies, which means they can only receive Rh negative blood. So it's not quite as simple as this. There is actually one other component. Not only can someone be type A, B, AB, or O, but they can also be A positive, B positive, AB positive, O positive, or the converse. If they don't have that Rh antibody, it would be A negative, B negative, AB negative, and O negative. Next up is blood vessels. Blood flows through your body through blood vessels, and these are little tubes that form a closed pipeline. Blood vessels have 3 main functions in the body. One is to deliver oxygen and nutrients to cells. Another is to carry away waste products from those cells. And the final one is to help to maintain blood pressure. There are 3 main types of blood vessels: arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, and because of that, the blood is under very high pressure. Blood flows from arteries to capillaries. Capillaries connect arteries and veins, and this is where the exchange of materials happens within the capillary. Finally, the veins carry blood to the heart and is under very low pressure. Arteries are found in the thick walls of muscle, and they have a pretty narrow opening. Capillaries have extremely thin walls, and this is important because it allows that material to move between blood and cells. And the veins, they carry the blood to the heart, and they have a very wide opening that we call a lumen. Capillaries distribute oxygen and nutrients, and in order to do that, vessels must be in close contact with the cells. The close contact is done by millions of microscopic, very tiny blood vessels that we call capillaries. And the structure of the capillaries, again, that very thin wall, allows them to exchange materials very effectively. Capillaries are the smallest of blood vessels. They deliver oxygen and nutrients and also remove waste from cells. Thin walls allows for that to happen. And those walls are actually selectively permeable, which means that some substances can pass through, but not all. And that's typically determined by size. Next up is the heart. The heart is a vital part of the circulatory system. It's a hollow muscular pump that will move blood through the body, and it's found in the chest cavity, behind the breastbone and slightly to the left. And it's about the size of a clenched fist. Blood will flow along two pathways in the body, and both of those pathways will converge at the heart. First pathway is called the pulmonary circuit. This carries oxygen-depleted blood from the heart to the lungs. Blood will pick up oxygen from the air and release carbon dioxide to the air. Oxygen-rich blood will then return to the heart to be pumped to the body. The systemic circuit then carries that oxygen-rich body from the heart to the rest of the body, where the blood will release the oxygen to cells and pick up carbon dioxide from the cells. That oxygen-depleted blood will then return to the heart to be pumped to the lungs. Let's look at that a little closer. So again, you have the pulmonary circuit, that's from the heart to the lungs and back again, and the systemic circuit that's from the heart to the body and back again. So blood coming from the body will have low oxygen. It will then travel into the heart, and from the heart to the lungs, where it will then pick up oxygen. Once it has high oxygen, it will then travel from the lungs back to the heart, and then through the body, where it will lose its oxygen again, and that process will continue. The heart contains, the upper two chambers of the heart, receive blood entering the heart, and they are called atria. You have a right atrium and a left atrium. The lower two chambers will pump blood out of the heart, and they are called ventricles, and you have a right ventricle and a left ventricle. Each atria is separated from the ventricle by valves. These are atrioventricular valves, or AV valves. And there's a tricuspid valve and a bicuspid valve. There are also valves between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery, and the left ventricle and the aorta. These are called semilunar valves. There's a pulmonary valve and an aortic valve. The right side of the heart forms the pulmonary circuit, so that oxygen-poor blood is pumped to the lungs, and then it will return as oxygen-rich. The left side of the heart forms the systemic circuit, and that's where the oxygen-rich blood is pumped to the body, and the oxygen-poor blood will return. Again, the pulmonary circuit is made up of the right side of the blood. It takes that deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs and back again. And the systemic circuit pumps that oxygenated blood from the heart to the body and back again. Taking a look at some of the anatomy, you've got the superior vena cava. Again, this is all making up the pulmonary circuit, and the inferior vena cava, right atrium, that AV valve on the right side, and the right ventricle. There's also the pulmonary valve, pulmonary artery. The septum is the part between the two ventricles. You've got a pulmonary vein, left atrium, an AV valve, and left ventricle. There's also the aortic valve, and then the aorta. So blood will enter from the right atrium and inferior vena cava. At that point, it will be low in oxygen. From the right atrium then, it'll go through the AV valve to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it'll then pass through that pulmonary valve, go to what is considered the pulmonary trunk. From there, it'll move into the right and left pulmonary arteries and move into the lungs. That is where the blood will then be oxygenated in the lungs, and it's returned to the heart through pulmonary veins. From those pulmonary veins, blood will flow into the left atrium. From the left atrium, blood flows through the bicuspid valve, or AV valve, into the right ventricle, the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, it'll go into the aortic semilunar valves and move to the aorta. Will then go to the body and distribute oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. Your heart rate is controlled by a pacemaker. The pacemaker is a special region of nerve cells in the heart that sets the heart rate. It lies in the wall of the right atrium, and it generates electrical impulses that will spread over the heart, making it contract or beat. That pacemaker will set the rate at which the heart contracts. When the ventricles contract, they create pressure, and that blood pressure is a resulting force that blood exerts on artery walls. And blood pressure is needed as it's what's used to drive the blood through the body via arteries and capillaries. Pressure is measured in millimeters of mercury, and it's represented by two numbers separated by a slash, like 120/70. The systolic pressure is the highest pressure in the artery. That's the first number, and it's produced when the ventricles contract. It's called the systole. And the diastolic pressure, that's the second number, the lower one, is the lowest pressure in the artery, and that's produced when the ventricles react, and that's called the diastole. So again, the systolic pressure is the higher one, that would be 120. The diastolic pressure is the lower one. 120/80 is considered normal blood pressure. If you have 140/90 or higher, that's considered to be high blood pressure or hypertension. High blood pressure, along with any of these factors, will increase the risk of serious cardiovascular issues. Speaking of disorders and diseases of the circulatory system, every year hundreds of thousands of people from all ages will die of cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease is caused by the buildup of fat deposits within the artery walls, and it comes in four main forms. You can have athero or arteriosclerosis, hypertension, heart attack, and stroke. So how does this happen? Well, babies are born with arteries that are smooth, slippery, and free of blockage. But as we age, cholesterol, calcium, and fat deposits will build up, and that's called plaque, inside the arteries. Plaque levels will increase throughout a person's life, and significant plaque buildup causes a narrowing of the arteries, leading to cardiovascular disease. The four main cardiovascular diseases, you can have arterial or atherosclerosis, that's the narrowing of the arteries due to plaque buildup. Arteriosclerosis is a more advanced stage resulting in hardening of the artery walls, which causes an increase in blood pressure and the chance of blood clots in the arteries. Hypertension is also known as high blood pressure. Prolonged hypertension causes the heart to work harder, which actually makes it weaker and can cause small tears in the artery walls. Heart attack is when a blood clot forms in the coronary arteries that feed the heart muscles, and that actually causes the heart muscle cells to die. Finally, stroke is when a blood clot forms in the arteries that actually lead to the brain, damage part of the brain downstream of the artery. There are other cardiovascular disorders, including all of these listed here. I'll quickly mention a few. Anemia is a condition in which the blood doesn't have enough healthy blood cells. This can be because your body doesn't make enough red blood cells, or bleeding causes you to lose more red blood cells more quickly than can be replaced. There are also conditions where the body will actually destroy red blood cells. This leads to reduced oxygen flow to the body, which can cause fatigue, pale skin, shortness of breath. Sometimes anemia can be effectively treated with iron supplements, but also blood transfusion and other medications can be used. Congestive heart failure is a chronic condition in which the heart doesn't pump blood as well as it should. It doesn't mean that it's not working, it's just weaker than it should be. Symptoms will include shortness of breath, fatigue, swollen legs, and treatment can include things like eating healthier, less salt, limiting fluid intake, and some prescription medicines. And that, my friends, will do it for the cardiovascular system.